pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good morning. Ann, can you just show the record, have the record show that all the commissioners are present with the exception of Commissioner Coluzzi. And I don't think there's any correspondence. We can move right into the city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. The Philadelphia Street Water Main Replacement project, most of that main has been installed and the individual service line connections will begin this week. The Beach Nourishment Project is ongoing and scheduled to be completed this week. The Great Lakes Dredge and Dock Company that's been doing the work will, at the end of this week, move on to Dewey Beach, and the timeline for that work is approximately 25 days. Phase 2 of the wastewater treatment plant electrical upgrade project, that bid opening is scheduled for November 19th. And City Hall will be closed on Monday, next Monday, November 11th, in observance of Veterans Day. There will be no residential trash pickup on Veterans Day. Citywide trash pickup will resume on Tuesday, November 12th. And we are very proud to recognize Mr. Evan Miller's work. Evan recently received the 2019 Delaware chapter of the American Society for Public Administration Award. Evan is the project coordinator here at the City of Rehoboth Beach, and the award recognizes a young professional working in Delaware who demonstrates excellence and contribution for public administration management, and we're very appreciative of Evan's service here as a full-time employee and his time here spent as a local government fellow for 2 years. Congratulations, Evan.
Congratulations, Evan.
That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
I have one question for the city manager. Would it be possible I've had a couple of our residents ask, publish, and maybe it is, I just can't find it on the website, to publish the leaf pickup schedule. Is it going to be like every Monday, every Tuesday? Like, is it on there somewhere already scheduled and published? Or maybe we could put it further up in the website. I've just had a few people ask, so I'm just wondering if we could make it a little more visible if it's there.
We'll make it more
Is it?
visible.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. City Solicitor.
I just mentioned, Mr. Mayor, that I know the commissioners have followed the activities of the Board of Adjustment relating to gross floor area. There's a motion for re-argument that's been filed on the Lingo property on Rehoboth Avenue, so the board will be rehearing that the 25th of this month. Their meeting time, I think, is switched now to 6 o'clock. They'll also be hearing a application relating to signage for a candy kitchen for anybody who's interested. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. Let's move right into, we have representatives from KCI Technologies here today regarding the outreach for the Resilient Communities Partnership Project. Debbie File.
It's been a while since I've seen everybody. Appreciate it. Debbie File with KCI. With me also is Chris Urbino, an engineer in our office. DNREC, Department of Natural Resources, is funding this project through their Delaware Coastal Management Program, which is also through National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So the City of Rehoboth is part of a partnership, which I'm going to get into, to talk about ways to be able to help some of the surface water. And I think Evan has been spearheading the majority of the project as well, so thanks. So the Resilient Community Partnership applied for funding, and out of that partnership, there's actually 7 municipalities collaboratively working towards the objectives. City of Rehoboth Beach, we have Dewey Beach, Lewis, South Bethany, Bethany Beach, Henlopen Acres, and then the town of Fenwick Island. Additional stakeholders that were noted in the application was Save Our Lakes Alliance 3 and the Delaware Center for Inland Bays. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of the project so you can see that. So the project is federally funded, as I stated, through Delaware Coastal Program Section. NOAA eventually Department of Commerce. There's actually 3 components of this project. The first one is an impervious surface coverage assessment, which I'll get into in just a little bit, the Coastal Delaware Best Management Practices Guide, and then the Municipal Toolkit, which is where KCI comes into play. So the University of Delaware created the Delaware Coastal Communities Impervious Surface Coverage Report just in August of 2019. They're willing to come in and do a more detailed presentation on their report if needed. We're going to give you a couple of the Cliff Notes versions today, and how this can help look for additional funding and additional program implementation with each municipality. So the objectives of the University of Delaware program was to assess accuracy in the impervious GIS layers in 2007 and 2016 for the Delaware coastal communities, which was the RCP participants. And their second objective was to determine change in impervious surface coverage between these 2 layers. The data sources they used was the state of Delaware actually has an impervious surface GIS layer of 2007. And then the second data source they used was the Chesapeake Conservancy land cover data set in 2016, which then refers to some information from 2014 and 2013. So as far as the accuracy assessment, Department of Natural Resources wanted us to be very, very specific about this. The accuracy is about 92%. Therefore, the changes that are indicated between the 2 errors are within the margin of error. They used a project raster tool. They then generated some sampling points and took some random points for comparison. And then visual sample points were from Google Earth and from the Google Street View. So with that, I do want to let you know, sorry, back to the surface area coverage. There was no field inventory at all. So there was no any on-site analysis. This was specifically done through Google Earth and Google Street View. So it's a great tool to be able to use. Once again, the accuracy specifically with the tree coverage probably needs to be a little bit more detailed. So out of that, this table really summarizes the private impervious surface in comparison to the total parcel area. I believe, I'm not sure, Evan, if we have the reports, if they were posted online or not.
We have them.
Okay. If not, we can get those online as well as the AECOM report so you can see the full report itself. But this did the total parcel area. It excludes the lakes, canals, and the beaches, and the total town area by the municipal layer. So if you look at Rehoboth Beach on the private area, I'm going to pull up my Cliff Notes here. The 2000 Delaware area had the private impervious surface for Rehoboth Beach at 0.82, and the private for the Chesapeake layer was 0.82 as well. So the private went to a 0.25 in the forward versus in a negative. So you've increased by 0.25. If you look at the impervious surface by parcel, which is your second column, it's pretty hard to read on the slide actually. And then you look at the Chesapeake layer, it went up just a little bit from the 38.34 to 38.59. And then for the town itself, you only increased from 20.90 from the 2007 to 21.03. So you're on the private total parcel is 0.14. So if you look at some other parcels, once again, this was not our study, so I'm just doing a Cliff Note version for you. If you look at some of the other municipalities, the increase in private parcel and private totals were pretty large. Fenwick, the 9.6, and you've got 7.89 for South Bethany, with Bethany about 4.26. And when this was, I'm going to refer to Evan a little bit, but when this was revealed, I know there was questions about what was calculated in it. Rehoboth or Lewis had some concerns on some comments on it as well. But once again, they said that they went by the Google Earth, they went by the 2 data sets, and it's 100% just comparing 2 data sets, basically. So we go to the next slide. So on an average, the beach town's impervious surface area collectively was 32% of the town area in 2007, with an increase of 35% by 2016. So out of those 7 communities that they analyzed, the increase was from 32 to 36 in 2016. Now the private land areas revealed 41% of the private impervious surface, to the total private land, 34% to the total parcel area, and 21% of the total area for 2007. So on the private land, we had from 41 private to private land, 34 total parcel, 21 total town. So it basically revealed a 3% increase in impervious surface area in the Delaware Beach communities over the 10-year period. The private designated areas within the town reveals a 2% increase in comparison to total town area from the 2007 to the 2016. So one of the comments we were talking about in this report was redevelopment. While redevelopment is happening, sometimes feels like it's greater in Rehoboth in certain areas where your impervious coverage is growing. According to the, once again, it's tree canopy driven as well as the GIS data. So if it's tree canopy driven, you're not seeing underneath the trees in this study. So then the percentages will be a little bit off. So if you have mature trees and you've tore down a small house and made it a larger house, that's not going to be classified as far as from the Google Street Earth as well. So I think the tree canopy probably hurts the study a little bit, but it's a good base, I think, to start with. Then the next study, and once again, we'll have those reports in detail. The next study was completed by AECOM, and this goes into the Coastal Delaware Best Management Practices Guide. This is where we're going to need input from municipalities, and this is where we come into play after we go through some of the BMPs for impervious coverage. So basically, the Practices Guide, AECOM prepared a community-based plan designed to summarize strategies for reducing existing and future impervious surface coverage and increasing stormwater infiltration in the Delaware coastal communities. The guide is intended to be used by residents, elected officials, and community members. So it's very difficult with 7 communities to make one size fits all. So you'll see some generality in the BMPs. Some will work for other municipalities that might not be the selection for certain municipalities. So basically, what is a best management practice? It's a technique or device that captures or treats stormwater runoff. Stormwater refers to the rainwater that flows off of different surfaces after it falls onto the ground. So the surface on which rainwater falls, they're classified actually into 2 categories. The first one's pervious, and these are very easy for people to get them confused, but pervious surface is surface that allows stormwater to seep into the earth, like gardens, forests, and grass. Impervious is surfaces that do not allow stormwater to seep into the earth, like driveways, roads, sidewalks, and rooftops. And a good example is the parking lot in Rehoboth, the parking lot that you have. You actually have pervious and impervious coverage in the parking lot. That's a really good example of how you have both working to meet, I should say, the safety, the regulations, and also allowing you to slow down some of the runoff. So if you look, your impervious is actually probably the travel lanes, I believe, in your parking lot, and the parking stalls themselves are pervious. So that's a good example as you leave, just to look in the parking lot. It's not bad asphalt. As we always say when people pull up, they're like, that's a really bad asphalt job. It's actually not. It's pervious and impervious. So it's green infrastructure. So there are 3 general scenarios upon which BMPs can be placed to manage runoff. Existing developed areas on a voluntary basis. Small impervious areas being proposed that would not otherwise fall under the 3rd scenario. And then larger, anything greater than 5,000 square feet earth disturbance being proposed. Just to let you know, anything over 5,000 square feet is going to Sussex Conservation District under the Delaware Stormwater Sediment Management Regulations. So over 5,000 is being caught by the state of Delaware through the Sussex Conservation District. Under 5,000 tends to be a little bit of the loophole area that we want to look at in the plans. And under 5,000 is usually single-family homes that maybe could be doing pervious coverage that would maybe detriment some of the neighboring properties. So we're starting to look at some of the recommendations under the 5,000 square feet on our end. So what's the benefit of the BMPs? I mean, everybody uses these words a lot. Most of them are included in this guide were chosen for their capability to reduce stormwater runoff, since frequent flooding has been an issue in most of the Delaware communities. So the first one is runoff rate reduction. This actually slows down stormwater or allows it to percolate into the soil to reduce flooding. Percolate. Water quality, it filters stormwater to remove the pollutants. Habitat creates, as we know, an area that's beneficial birds or small mammals, and aesthetics. It has a high approval rating among property owners and enhances the look of landscaping. So in the AECom guide, I believe there's 12, I think it's 12 BMPs that are recommended. I'm gonna just quickly go over the definitions of these for time of your workshop. But the first one they have in there is bioretention. A bioretention area reduces flooding, erosion, pollution, and enhances groundwater recharge, wildlife habitat, and aesthetics. You'll see one on the right-hand side that's a Rehoboth Art League. That's actually a bioretention. And in this, we're gonna ask for an exercise to be completed by the city manager with input from the community is, are these things that can be incentives given, or can they be regulatory? So in a bioretention, incentives can be given on rain gardens, on trust box filters, streetscape bioretention, large retention, raised planter boxes. These are all our bioretention categories. Some of these you can regulate, some can be incentives. These were the recommendations that came from AECom in the document. So now what we're gonna do is we actually have a chart that we'll be giving to the city when we leave today that actually says, are you interested in providing incentives? Are you interested in making this a requirement and a policy? Some of them are very difficult to do. As in with everything, once it's installed, there's also a maintenance side of things as well. So you're gonna see us go through these very quickly as far as definition and see if you're interested in it. We're using this opportunity right now to kind of educate everybody on what the BMPs are, and then further discussion needs to take place on policy. So the bioswale, an elongated linear bioretention facility. It's often found on the roadsides. You'll see a lot of in the right-of-way, especially between one, all up and down the stretch. They can be outfitted with small dams to retain water on steeper slopes. So there's actually a Center for Inland Bay image there from the town of South Bethany Beach on the bioswale. That's being done, like you said, on a lot of the medians you'll see. And they have sponsorship signs as well. Infiltration. So this is infiltration practices temporarily store stormwater before slowly allowing it to drain in the soil. So the image there you see is the town of Fenwick. They installed an infiltration trench along Baird Street to filter stormwater before it actually drains into the canal. So once again, the question we'll see on the worksheet is, should it be regulatory where it's required? And then we get into, should it be required on private property and public property as well? Permeable pavement. Permeable pavement allows stormwater runoff to drain while also filtering the pollutants. So the picture on the right is the Center for Inland Bays. It's their main office in the Indian River Bay. So the parking lot helps disperse water during high rain events, which is similar to what you have in the parking lot. Another BMP is impervious removal. When constrained to implement other BMPs, impervious surfaces can simply be removed and replaced with pervious surface to reduce runoff. So if you look at the picture on the right, there's actually, they said more and more residents are choosing to use pavers or gravel, which actually allows the infiltration instead of the traditional concrete for driveways or walkways. So it allows the water to seep through. Keep going down below. A dry well is another one, and once again, we have to see what's permitted in your municipality and what isn't, but a dry well collects and stores water that can be treated or filtered. So there's a diagram to the right, how a dry well works, where the water comes down the downspout, you have overflow that goes out, but there's actually a fabric, landscape fabric with crushed stone that it filters down into. So once again, these need to be find out if they're regulated within the municipality or not, but there's, I think they came up with some pretty good approaches on a general approach. Rooftop disconnect. This is another one for you hear us about inflow and infiltration with storm or sewer. Rooftop disconnect is a big one as well. So it's repositioning downspout so that stormwater flows onto a permeable surface instead of an impermeable surface. It can be achieved by directing runoff onto grass or landscaping. So if you look at the right-hand side, the Canal in Lewis, it has a system of drainage pipes that convey water from the roof to the planted beds around the hotel. And our next BMP is green roof. This is becoming more and more popular. And really a lot of the BMPs that you're seeing being actually initiatives taking place are a lot in the Pennsylvania area because of the MS4 requirements and TMDLs, so the Chesapeake Bay area, basically. but a rooftop garden where plants and engineering growing media are used to treat and store rainwater. Green roofs provide building insulation, which often results in decreased costs for heating and cooling. So there's an example of a green roof installed in a commercial building on the right-hand side as well. So for example, if you have new hotels or new, and people are going, higher in height on some of the commercial buildings, it can be an entertainment area as well as a green roof area to help with their drainage and runoff. Rainwater harvesting is another one. So rain barrels and cisterns can be used to store rainwater to be reused for gardening and other non-potable water activities. On the right-hand side, there's a resident of Lewis that installed a 2,000-gallon cistern on site. So basically stores so you can use it again. There's a lot of people, and there's maintenance involved in all the BMPs to remember. But basically they can use this to do their own, almost as a water provider to be able to water their plants, their flowers, their grass, etc. Tree planting. I know Commissioner Gay is very, very happy to see this one on there, right? Tree planting. Trees absorb much more water than typical plants. Thus, they are an effective way to reduce stormwater runoff. So planting large groups of trees together can result in a greater runoff reduction. So we have a picture here. The trees near Rehoboth Art League's walking path absorb stormwater runoff. And there's several other benefits to trees. So there's incentives, and then we can talk about regulatory as well. And conservation landscaping. So this is a popular one as well. Conservation landscaping can be done to reduce stormwater in locations where detaining stormwater is really not practical. So gardening with your native plants increases habitat, reduces runoff rates, and promotes healthy soils. So one of the residents in Fenwick Island on Baird Street Extended installed this conservation landscaping. Filtration is another one. Filtration practices allow stormwater to percolate into the ground. They require that the underlying soils be permeable enough to drain water from the BMP within 72 hours. So it's skewed a little bit, but if you see the picture above, it's an underground sand filter in the Newark, actually the City of Newark's municipal parking lot. So you'll see it there right below the hatched-in blue parking lot spaces. So this is going to be on private land on this example. So now we have the 12 BMPs. There was a 17-question survey that was released in early spring to the municipalities. So now what we have to do is we have to do a deep dive to get our report into there. We're collecting all this information, and now we're customizing a little bit more for each municipality. Once again, we can't treat each municipality the same, nor does everybody want to be treated the same for some reason. So we have to have our report in by December of 2019. So we're going to ask for input from municipalities, and we're going to ask that it be shepherded through the municipality's point of contact driven by the city manager. We'd like to obtain preferred public and private BMPs. So what we completed was, let me get out of this for 1 second. We just have a brief worksheet that actually lists out all the BMPs we went through, and actually gives an incentive or regulatory. Is the municipality interested in incentivizing some of these options, requiring some of them as policy, and if so, are you looking at doing it on private land, public land, both, or neither? So this worksheet is not making sure that you're making all of the decisions today or all the decisions in the next couple weeks. This is basically saying, are you interested? One thing we learned on this project was to get into everybody's code and make them very, very specific requires a longer education component for the municipalities. So for example, in the audience, if we came in to say, we're gonna require everybody to wanna buy our retention. If you have a new single family home or redevelopment of any kind, we're gonna require you to do, one of the BMPs is buyer retention. You pick one of the 5. Well, the first thing some of the people in the audience might say is, I know what the rain garden is, but what the heck are maybe some of the other 2? So there's an educational component that what we want to do in this project is be able to lay each municipality up to say, what are you thinking initially? What would then with another round of funding needs to come out to say, how can we take some of these further out and get education from the public, get buy-in from the public, and what can we do on some of the private land owned by the municipalities? That answer to those questions I just gave differs quite differently from each municipality. And, you know, everybody says try to get green infrastructure, but there's a cost component added to that. There's also a maintenance component added to that. So what our job is now is to take this information, analyze each municipality, come up in a report of what everybody had to say, give some funding examples, give some other examples of ways to implement and initiate. I just wanted to show you that worksheet that we're leaving for homework. And so that worksheet is number 1, where we obtain the preferred public and private BMPs. And then the second one we have, once again, I want to make sure we're very clear here. This is not a, let me get back to the whole slideshow. This is not a full commitment from the municipality that says, yes, we are going to make it regulatory. This is further exploration. So if you were to tell, you know, Sharon or Evan to say, we're interested in finding out about rain gardens, we're interested in finding about raised planter boxes, about incentives. Well, that's also driven budgetarily. How are they going to be built? Are they going to be built to the standard to be able to meet some of the credits that you want? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. This is just exploratory information up front for the municipality to figure out maybe how you want to move forward and how you can get funding to move forward. The second thing we'd like to do, and we'll be doing this with interviews individually with each municipality, is obtaining coastal community unique challenges. We're a little easier in Rehoboth in understanding because we're also doing the 10-year comprehensive development plan, but we want to obtain the coastal community unique challenges and put a matrix on those for all the municipalities, because you might forget some of the things that we know you have as challenges, and other municipalities may have differing challenges. Some municipalities have one way in, one way out with traffic, and that seems to be a unique challenge. So then the stormwater system can't handle the rain, the flooding, the back bay, the ocean, etc. So there's a lot of different things to look at. We want to hear about your challenges. And then we'd have the worksheet back by November 22nd. So we'd be able to collect all of this data, be able to do the matrix on who's involved with what and the unique challenges, and turn our report in then for a draft to the RCP to be able to review it. So our toolkit, basically our end of the project, we're a third of the project, is once again to identify the BMPs, summarize the unique challenges. We'll also be providing a coastal community ordinance matrix. So the municipalities several months ago were asked what's in your code, and there's several different codes that relate to drainage and flooding and stormwater. Is it in subdivision? Is it in zoning? Is it in specifications? So we're going to take that off the plate of the municipality, and we're actually going to research and provide a matrix of the ordinances. This way, if another town has an ordinance that somebody really likes or isn't working or needs to be tweaked or is the latest version, the municipalities can talk amongst each other and share some of the knowledge and the data they have together collectively and be able to use some of the same type of ordinances. And then we're also going to prepare implementation, which is a recommendation for the next steps. So this is where we lay a lot up for funding. So I call this first year exploratory, data-driven, and implementation. But there's several different funding mechanisms to do some of these smaller BMPs or some of these action items through DENREC. So we're actually going to lay this up to say here's a list of the things that everybody can consider. What priority do you have? How's your financial capability to be able to match cash grant? And then the last, which we threw this in as a bonus because the change of scope, was identifying all the funding opportunities. So basically, it's usually the KCI business plan, but we're going to lay out some of the fundings that you can consider in City of Rehoboth to get some of these getting off their feet. And then we are going through 7 presentations. So if you'd like to come on with us later on, we'll be in Lewis this afternoon, and then next Friday, Hinlope and South Bethany. So we have several other, right up until December 6th. You're our first presentation. And then we will have the draft report at the December 16th meeting. We'll be doing a presentation on our third component of the report, getting comments back so we can wrap that document up, and we'll get it back to each municipality to be able to view. So the municipalities will have 3 reports that's funded through the DENREC program. And with that, are there any questions? We definitely wanted to let you know where we're at in the project. Appreciate the opportunity to work with all the municipalities in DENREC. And questions or concerns? Yes.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Really good to have you with us this morning and to see this moving ahead. Are you aware if any of the other municipalities that you're working with here in the coastal community have anything in their zoning code that deals with pervious and impervious
Yes.
surfaces?
Yes, I am. So let me pull up one of the questionnaire that they did. And there is, okay, so the question in the AECom report was, what section of your city code regulates impervious surface coverage? Does your community have ordinances or regulations for the percentage of impervious coverage on residential or commercial? So Fenwick actually had it through floor area, through FAR. They also had it in setbacks, which is another regulatory area, and in their zoning. It goes into the chapters, but not specifics. Bethany had none. Rehoboth Beach has the natural area, the floor area ratio, and lot coverage, all in section 270. Henlopen, the code does not reference impervious, but lot and building requirements are defined in their zoning code. And then South Bethany had pervious minimum requirements of 55% and impervious max at 45%. And then they go into the sections of the code that kind of require that a little more. And then Lewis said protection overlay and the table of dimension regulations is all that they had. So taking that information, we'd like to go back through the code again to double check, because I feel that some of the people that answered this maybe didn't look at the certain sections since it's in multiple. But impervious wasn't something that was really thought of, or pervious, in any code when they were first written probably 10 or plus years ago. Right. So that definition usually doesn't even evolve into the code. It usually says maximum coverage, lot coverage is 55%. And then you look at the word lot coverage, and is it structural? Is it decking? Is it accessory buildings? So you just break it down by those definitions. So that'll be a really good addition in definitions of different sections of the code. We think we can come out with that.
Thank you.
Deb-
Are you aware if Sussex County has anything beyond what you started with today around the 5,000 foot?
The conservation district is only gonna go 5,000 or more, but there is the gap below that,
Right.
that can either municipal responsibility, or we'd actually probably, one of the implementation items would be to further contact Sussex Conservation District as an implementation item to see if they're interested in reviewing below 5,000, or if they're interested in doing a memo of understanding with specific municipalities, or if they're interested in charging for that review on behalf of the municipalities. So I think there's some further discussion that could take place in implementation.
We actually had Jessica Watson speaking to the
Yes,
Planning
she's
Commission this
great.
summer, and gave us some materials, and she's very interested in working
Yep.
with us. In fact, the timing of this could not be better, because, we've got a discussion coming up later with the stormwater management ordinance, and, we're in the process of redoing our tree ordinance, and we had actually the tree committee had a speaker come in, Doug Talmay, a few weeks ago, and really talked about, in addition to trees, the native landscapes and how important they were, not only for conservation, but, to sustain wildlife. So I'm glad to see that the BMPs here are about both water quality as well as habitat, because he really gave an eye-opening presentation of how important that is.
Well, that's really good.
So the timing is great. The one question I had is on, you talk about the coastal community ordinance matrix. Is that something that's going to be completed by the end of the year?
Yes, so basically, majority of municipalities are on general code, muni code.
Yeah.
So you can go in there and you can search by certain topics. So we know pervious and impervious do not exist in a lot of other ones. But we will look for lot coverage. So there's a lot of definitions that we're doing searches on. And then we're going to be, yes, that will be done, but it's just the matrix.
Right.
So people will know where to go to get further information.
So it's just basically what you named off there as in the code.
Yeah, I think that, if I was to, it depends on who you call. So sometimes if you're calling a clerk and they say, well, where would it be? They're gonna ask somebody, it might say, here's where it's at.
Right.
But a lot of people forget about the standard specifications, which is actually usually a separate document outside of your code. And that says what type of surface you put on driveways. It has your street specifications, your curbing. So there was no referral, just from a gut check, there was no referral to any of those in the responses. So we'd like to dive down a little bit deeper and then put it in a matrix versus a questionnaire.
Is there any chance you'd have model ordinances from other places besides coastal Delaware that would be, might help?
There could be, we took the model ordinance portion off of the scope and re-scoped the project, because every municipality will be different. So there's political drivenness, which will be interesting. There's monetary driven, there's policy, and enforcement. So if you have people start putting up, let's just talk rain barrels, because that's probably the easiest. The town comes in, gets a grant for 500 rain barrels. Everybody puts them in, they're inspected, it's funded by, so hopefully federal government, comes in and inspects them, and then they're not maintained. So now we have standing water, we have mosquitoes, so there's some things to be able to look at. Why I'm not, it sounded so negative, why I'm not against it, it's the enforcement of it and the funding as well as the maintenance. So those are things to look at. So I think what we're doing is going through and trying to get a little bit specific, but very general, so people can use the tool to be able to take it a step further. Kind of like the implementation you do in a comp plan. Here's the implementation items. Are there two that you would want to maybe further get into now, or what funding is available to look at them? And a lot of people, I think, are going to look at the impervious type surfaces as a top one. We'd like to dig down on that one a little bit more, probably.
One of the challenges that I see, which I guess would be an opportunity for us in revisiting the zoning code is, and I'd like to see what other communities do and how they interpret some things, but I mean, we have pervious things in this city that we actually, from a zoning standpoint, consider them impervious. It does drain water, but from a lot coverage standpoint, we consider them impervious. So I'd like to, I think that's a sort of a challenge in this whole exercise. And I'd like to see what other communities are doing on some of those.
That's a good
types of
idea too,
things.
because there could be incentives where maybe it gets reduced from the requirement a little bit if you use that type of material. So that could be one that could be in the incentives section to say, if you're not gonna do this type of surface, and you're gonna do a surface that's more green infrastructure and helpful to our community, then we can reduce your parking by, or we can reduce the requirements, or we can give an incentive of some kind. But once again, it's policy, financial, so that's a good one to be able to tap into to say, what can we do to be able to maybe encourage?
Right, so I think that leaves us an opportunity to provide more incentives.
Absolutely. Yep.
Debbie, are you aware if the County Conservation District is doing any real enforcement across the county or within our
I
area?
can't speak on their behalf, but I know that the large stormwater ponds and the tax ditches would fall under tax association. I know large stormwater ponds were getting inspected. I don't know how frequently, since there's a lot more now. And I'm not sure how often and how frequent, but I'd like to be able to find that information and be able to collect that and give that back probably in the report would be good. And I think it depends on staffing and what availability and number of reviews.
Oh, yeah.
They've been pretty busy reviewing a lot lately, so
There's
I'm
a
not
real
sure about the
cost to
inspection.
doing enforcement.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
My name is Sally Foreman, and I'm founder and president of Save Our Lakes Alliance 3, and I'm happy to meet you.
A couple emails, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I thank you for the presentation. It really, I think it's very good. One thing I want to mention, because you've mentioned it and we know how important it is incentives. And back in 2009, SOLA 3 created what we call the Conservation Award. And that was for improving shorelines with natural riparian buffers. In fact, the city won one of those awards, I think, in 2010. And there used to be a nice sign or plaque that we provided in the commissioner's room that I don't know where that is anymore, but I'd like to know. And we also gave that to property owners. I think 5 property owners were incentivized to do it. And we know how important it is, natural riparian buffers. I mean, it is a protection in terms of erosion, sediment control, runoff, habitat, as well as filtering out a lot of things that would be going into our lakes. And of course, this community is especially unique because it has these 3 wonderful freshwater lakes. We now have another incentive, which is a $3,000 matching grant that will cover not only shoreline improvement, but also the projects that you identified here for treating stormwater runoff. But I do wonder why shoreline riparian buffers are not included in your presentation.
I'd have to ask, we can find that out for you. I'd have to ask AECom, is there a portion of the report? But we will do a follow-up on that for sure to see if it wasn't a BMP, if it's another suggested initiative, we can definitely cover it in our toolkit. And I would really like to follow up because it is a really good benefit what you're doing for Rehoboth as far as a partner with Rehoboth. So I think mentioning some of those initiatives and implementation items you have in the report is also beneficial for Rehoboth as well.
Yeah, well, I think the other communities, they don't always have lakes, but they certainly have bayfront and
Absolutely.
shoreline properties that
living
are
shoreline.
that are privately owned, and
Right.
it would apply there too.
Yep, I think it's just the ownership of living shorelines, but we will definitely follow up with AECom. That'll be great. Appreciate that comment. And we will follow up with you on the incentives, because that's nice to put in.
Thank you.
Nonprofit.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. Stan Mills, 34 Maryland Avenue. I've got a question for Debbie. As you know, your implementation routing for BMPs is twofold. One is regulatory and one is incentives. And I wanted to continue on the incentives thing and maybe get some examples so that we understand what you're talking about and define it a little better. For instance, what comes in mind to me are specifically deviations from the zoning code that favor the property owner and then become the incentive. So maybe you could talk.
The only two that just pop into mind quickly is monetarily, which means that not cash back, but a reduction of some kind of a building permit fee, some kind of fee, et cetera. And that's driven by budget and policy. The other one, like you said, is through relaxation of some of the code requirements. The biggest driver on BMPs, believe it or not, is if you have to get into the MS4 permitting, because then you'll get the credits back that you need for the TMDL, et cetera, on the Chesapeake Bay or as things come through. That's getting more hit through the Seaford area right now in the next tier. So that there's not a driver here other than the protection, I don't mean to say other than, but the protection of the community, the protection of the natural resources that you have. So funding, I would say money and policy right now, but we'd like to dive into that a little bit further into our research to be able to get that in the final report. But those are usually the two top. Sometimes timing. I've seen a municipality where they expedite permits for people that do BMPs. That's once again policy driven, but we'll list these out, and then each municipality would pick what would best suit their needs.
And in your response, you mentioned MS4, which might need its own explanations,
Yes.
whether it applies to Rehoboth or not. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
yep,
Thank you.
thank you.
Anyone else?
Charlie Garlow, 82 Sussex Street. I'm interested in the idea that the dry wells, and that doesn't really look like it's affecting the pervious or impervious surface, but it is helping to address the idea of too much stormwater running off into the streets or someplace else, washing the oil off of the streets into the canal or the ocean. Is there a way of quantifying the beneficial impact of the different sorts of best management practices? It looks like there might be some apples to oranges comparison, like with the dry well example, so that we could figure out how do we get the biggest bang for the buck, which are the low-lying fruit, if you will, to pick amongst the various choices that we have.
I could probably, Evan, we could probably punt that back, because on the technical side of things, that was not our part of the project. But I think we could probably punt that back to say, is there any way to quantify any of these, a high, medium, or low priority, or like you said, biggest bang for the buck, whether it's financially or reduction of the runoff, the calculation. So I think that's something we can ask to see if we can get that technical and or lay it up for the next round of funding, because I know that their project was completed with the draft, but I think that's also another good example of taking the BMPs to figure out, are there any other alternatives we can do as far as getting the credits? Great comments.
Anything else? Anybody? Thank you very much,
Thank
Debbie.
you for the feedback. It was great. Appreciate
that.
it. And I'll be back on Friday.
Very helpful.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to move right into old business. Unfortunately, A on no business, which was a presentation by the Jolly Trolley Company, has been postponed. That'll take place at our December workshop. They had asked to postpone that. And we'll move right into B, which is further discussion regarding the importance of adopting the 2018 International Building Code updates. And I think there's something in your packet.
There is, Mayor. This relates back to, if you remember, Mr. Molina was here last month and spoke about the importance of adopting the 2018 codes. We're currently under the 2012 codes, and that includes the building code, the energy conservation code, the existing building code, the fuel gas code, the mechanical code, the plumbing code, the residential code, and standards for accessible and usable buildings and facilities. So we're currently, when a plan comes in for review, our Building and Licensing Office used the 2012 codes to review it. This ordinance would update all of those codes to the 2018 version of them. So it's a lengthy ordinance in your package, but you'll see a lot of it is just striking the date or the year 2012 and inserting the date 2018 for all these various codes.
This would be something that basically Dom's been working with you on this, and
I should mention,
is for a vote at the 15th.
that's right. And I should mention that both Dom and Matt, the two building officials, spent a lot of time doing a little bit of my work for me, making this ordinance a lot easier to prepare. So I appreciate their efforts there.
Are there any questions? Anybody?
I would just like to ask the solicitor, are there any concerns in this for us as a municipality? Is there any reason not to support this? Anything we need to be aware of?
Most municipalities are going to the 2018. I can't say across the state how many have gotten there yet. Some of the municipalities actually in their code, they just say whatever the most recent version of the codes are, that's what we're adopting. We've been reluctant to do that in Rehoboth Beach because you never know what might be inserted, for example, and this is one that I should raise with you. For example, when the 2012 codes came out, they required sprinkling of residential properties. We in Rehoboth Beach exempted that so that residential properties did not have to add sprinkling. Under the 2018 code, it maintains the sprinkling of residential properties. And I think you'll recall that the building officials are recommending that you maintain that in the 2018 codes rather than exempting it this time. The city of Newark, I understand, now has a requirement of sprinkling for residential properties. I'm not sure how many others across the state have included that within their code updates. But that is one area that's maybe a decision point for you all.
Do we have an analysis at all, if I could follow on with that, of what's new in the code and how it would impact our current practices or policies within City of Rehoboth?
We don't, that I'm aware of, other than I know that Dom and Matt have spent a long time looking at the codes and
Yeah.
going through the tables, and they haven't raised anything of specific concern.
Is there a list somewhere, though, of the of what's changing? I mean, because this is just this gives the chapter of the code, but
Right.
doesn't say specifically what it is.
I
Is there like a
imagine, so these were put out by the International Code Company, and I imagine that the code company would likely have a markup somewhere between the 2012 and 2018, and we can get that and provide it to you. I don't.
That was
currently have it,
my
but
next question. Is that available anywhere?
We
I know
will-
it's a voluminous document, but I
I'll
don't know
take
if
that
it's
as a task to figure out and distribute to
Yeah.
you all by email.
But I'd also like to see not just what the changes are, but in general, how they would impact current practices within the city so that we can be aware of and communicate appropriately to our residents.
And there are numerous ones, I think, you'll find. This isn't something that is new. The city's done this before, and it's best to keep up with it because we rely on the ICC along with our own codes. So we can certainly get that list, and Dom isn't unable to be here today to comment on that, but I know that there are sections in the new code that that's one of the reasons why his recommendation was to update it.
Yeah, again, I think that's great. It makes sense to use a standard. Again, I just don't want any of our residents kind of caught off guard with any changes that occur through the adoption of this without given appropriate notice. So I think somehow understanding not just the changes, but the impacts to our current practices, maybe not point by point, but whatever you think's important.
Yeah, I will mention that these are not zoning changes, but similar to zoning changes, if anybody has in their home now some, electrical work that was done under the 2012 code that is no longer code compliant with the 2018, we're not going to go into homes and say you got to now update to 2018. it's for, pretty much for new construction and additions going forward.
Or but if somebody wants to, kind of comes in for a permit for additional electrical work, then we would say, okay, now you have to come up to the 18 code, right? I mean,
You would certainly, any new work would certainly have to
That's all.
comply with the 18, that's right. Yeah.
it'd just
Okay.
be good to know that.
Matt, do you want to comment on anything? I don't know if you've heard the commissioners' discussion in the past 5 minutes or so. The advantages of adopting the new code.
Good morning. I think probably the biggest advantage would be is to keep ourselves up to date as far as insurance practices are concerned with adopting the new code. There aren't very many big changes that are associated with coming up from 2012 to 2018, other than, of course, the introduction of residential sprinklers and potentially a little bit more strapping, of course, according to wind zones. It does not put us back into the wind zone category where we have to put in the impact-resistant glazing and do the strapping all the way from basically the ridge to the foundation, but it does incorporate a little bit more structural considerations. Other than that, it's really not that big of a change, and it just pulls us into alignment with, future building.
Have you had many reactions to the sprinklers for residential?
So we've had a little bit of pushback, and I've actually had one contractor, in lieu of doing the floor protection, which is required if you put mechanical services down into the crawl space, you're required to either put some floor finish underneath of there to control the burn, or introduce a sprinkler system. Some contractors have gone to that sprinkler system just above the mechanicals, and it's been, the cost associated has been the same compared to protecting the floor joist or putting in the sprinkler system. Now, obviously, with full systems, the cost is going to be a little bit more. Pumps are involved, higher lines coming in from the water system. But in the grand scheme of things, on the estimates that I'm seeing, it's not that big, that huge of a difference compared to normal construction practices.
Thank you, Matt. Sorry to get you away from
I'm sorry, Matt, do you know if there is does the International Code Company put out a kind of a red line version between 2012, 2018?
So the ICC doesn't necessarily put that out, but there are some local factions around here that we go to a couple of their trainings that do put out significant changes to the code book. So we just did one last year, the significant changes to the 2018, but it's not ICC published. It's more of just other factions that are looking at the codes and saying this has changed from this.
Are those materials that are easily distributable to commissioners? They were asking if they could see kind of what's
I certainly have a book, and we may have two books that we could circulate.
Okay.
And we might be able to obtain more copies of that, but there are publications out there.
Is it lengthy, or is that
Maybe
electronic
150,
version?
200 pages. I don't have an electronic copy, but I do have a paperback.
Matt, is it,
Yes, sir.
is it fair to say that the sprinkler requirement was in the 2012 code? We just chose not to adopt that section, and your recommendation now is that we do adopt it?
It is in the 2012 code. We have moved much with Sussex County. They bring their own addendums in, and Sussex County has abolished that because of their own reasons, implications of putting these sprinkler systems on well-driven systems. It's just, the cost is huge. My recommendation is to move how you would wish to move. There are other municipalities that are adopting their addendums to abolish the sprinkler systems, just like some other parts of the code as far as stair stringers and stuff like that. But it's really what the city's, the future is, how we choose to move, basically.
Solicitor, is that the carve out for the sprinkler system that we did not adopt? Is that change in this current ordinance?
In this current
before us?
ordinance, it is. There's no carve out for exempting sprinkling in residential. So if you adopted it as it's written now, there would be sprinkling required in residential properties.
Thank you,
And
Matt.
that would become effective once we approve.
We're already doing it, aren't we?
No, I think we're gonna, we spoke last week about it.
Anything in the pipeline?
Right, that's right, nothing in the pipeline, and then I think we talked about what would be the implementation date. Matt, didn't we say it's not gonna be an immediate thing? We probably, once it's adopted, put out some notice so people are aware.
Yeah, that's correct. And there are some specifications, or there's some language in the code that says, you know, if these plans, I heard the question earlier, these plans, if they were submitted prior to our official adoption, they would be reviewed at the time that they were applied for.
Submitted to you.
Correct.
yes.
Yeah.
So anything that's already in your shop is not going to have the sprinklers?
Yes, ma'am.
I think we need to go far beyond that. People that have, you know, not submitted plans yet, but spent quite a bit of money designing the house and having architectural plans done, I think consideration needs to be given for those folks.
Yeah, but I think part of that is figuring out what the right implementation date is. I don't know if it's weeks or months after you all actually after the commissioners actually adopt the ordinance. I don't know what the appropriate time is yet. That's something we'll need to figure out and bring a recommendation to you to make sure that nobody's caught up in that exact scenario.
So this would be, if we vote on this at our regular meeting, this would be implementation as it says. However, as far as the sprinkler situation, that'll take place at some future date.
No, I think we will. I think the whole thing would be.
No, I mean, but as far as people's having their plans in or not having their plans in by a specific date.
Right. I think that the ordinance, when it comes to you for your voting meeting, as it's crafted right now, typically we have a provision in there that says this ordinance takes effect immediately upon the adoption by the commissioners. That provision is not in this ordinance because we want to bring you a recommendation as to what is an appropriate time for it to actually be implemented. And we'll bring that to you. I'll try to circulate something before your regular meeting, but we haven't figured out what the right time is yet to implement it, just because we're also concerned about people who have plans and are working and spending money.
Well, and I think to be fair, it needs to be a time certain in the future. You know, maybe even 6 months to a year in the future. So, you know, individuals can identify when exactly it takes effect and cater to the needs that they have in right now.
So is the intent to vote on this at the next regular meeting? Because I'd sure like to see the list of what the changes are in our communication and timing strategy around this first. So it seems kind of a rush to vote on it. But I'm open. I'm just curious what the timing is.
I guess what I would suggest is that you have it on your agenda, your regular meeting agenda for possibly voting on it. We will try to distribute materials ahead of time so you have them to look at. And if you feel comfortable at that time voting, you can. If not, again, if we're going to implement it, you know, in maybe as much as 6 months or a year, you know, 4 weeks is probably not going to make a big difference as to when it actually gets approved. So let us try to get some materials to you based upon the discussion we've had, and we'll see if you're ready to vote the end of this month or not.
Matt, is there such a thing as the average cost of a sprinkler system in new construction and kind of the average size new home in Rehoboth Beach?
So I did a little research myself into that, looking for that same question. There's rough estimates, and it really all depends on what your water systems, your supply system is. For instance, again, if you're out in the county, hence why they did their own ordinance for this. If you're on a well-driven system, you've got to have a tank, you've got to have a pump, you've got to have all these other things that it's, you know, obviously the cost gets driven up. On a public system, those needs aren't present. Typically you can run your sprinkler system off of a community system. So there are other implications, you know, other factors that gives that cost. But from my research, what I've seen basically is anywhere from like a $6,000 to $12,000 increase of a house price. So in the grand scheme of thing, again, it's not, when you're talking $1 million, $2 million homes, that's almost a little bit of a drop in the bucket.
Does it put a burden on the current infrastructure?
It possibly could, and that's something we would have to look at. But we also take into account one of our houses that actually just went through this, they were forced to put in a tank to hold the water that would be needed, required if the sprinkler system ever were to go off. They have to upkeep so many gallons per minute, for the flow. They were forced to put that storage tank in to maintain that flow. So it could be, if we adopted that ordinance, we would say maybe you need to hold a tank in your own property to, hold the required amount of gallons for for the system to operate.
City Manager, I think it would be helpful to have Kevin weigh in on the topic at the next meeting before we vote. I mean, I'd like to know from the water standpoint, is it going to be a burden on the system? And
Right now, commercial has to have, new construction has to have sprinklers.
Correct.
And renovations have to have sprinklers above and beyond, I think, was it 99 people or something like that?
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
And is that putting much of a burden on the infrastructure?
Not that we've seen so far.
And are they supposed to put on new tanks as well, or?
No, typically it seems as the commercial systems, they have their own pump requirements
that's what I
according
thought.
to their buildings. So they have their own pumps on hand already. So whatever they're drawing off the city system is adequate enough.
And would the residentials also have to have the pump system, or does the tank replace the pump system?
I would say it depends on the system and how large the system is, whether it's, being accounted for on the second floor. Obviously, you have to have enough head pressure to get that water up, fighting gravity. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff in the application of a residential submission versus a commercial. Commercial, you're almost instantly forced to put the pump in anyway.
And the commercial system, I would imagine, is much more expensive than the
It is, yes, sir.
residential. Okay, thank you. Anything else? If not, Ann, if you can just put a place mark on the next meeting for that, and then Glenn and Matt will let us know if we're ready for a vote.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank
That's
you,
very
Matt.
helpful.
Yes.
Good morning, Walter Graham. Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. In line 83 of what's being proposed, I see the fine has, and I'm not familiar with the building code, is proposed to be 3 times the required permit fee. Is that a change?
I believe that is a change. Matt might be able to speak to this as well. I understand that traditionally we had charged 2 times the building code fee. I think that's right, and I think we're going to 3 now. And is that consistent with, commissioners might want to know why we went to 3 instead of 2. I'm not sure what the reason was for that.
That's to be answered now. It's just a question before it comes to a vote.
Thanks.
And the other is in section 12 of the residential code, on or about line 152. It was my understanding a couple years ago that this area was changed back from 120 to 100 miles an hour. Is this a change up, and if so, from where did it come? I thought I understood that National Weather Service and the Hurricane Council, so what raised it back to 120 miles per hour? Because that starts to make windows, and I don't know the details of it, that have to be able to handle a 2 before or 4 before blown through it, definitely does change the nature of the cost of a house, especially if you're not on the ocean front. I'm not familiar with it enough, but I think it ought to be addressed, or at least to have the answer when people start to ask it. A side comment, but close to it, the Fire Prevention Commission has not yet adopted the new NFPA regulations, and they make some exceptions. I'm not going to talk about sprinklers, but we're still working on 2017. This shouldn't changes, logical changes that you want here, shouldn't be set up for a year away. Most of the stuff that's in the codes is responsible for life safety, and I would encourage you not to look at a year away, to look at 6 months away, unless there's some items that cannot be solved easily. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Please.
Charlie Garlow, 82 Sussex Street. Thank you, Commissioners, for taking on this consideration. If the 2018 updates to the code, I have not read the 200-page document that Matt referred to, if it has nothing in there much more other than the sprinklers and doesn't take a significant step in improving the energy efficiency of the residential homes, I'll be disappointed because there are new technologies coming on board all the time. I know that the code is something that gets negotiated out by a lot of the real estate and other stakeholders who are involved in this. But at some point, I hope that you can add to your already burdensome task list that you have to review those sorts of considerations to make Rehoboth Beach a leader in green technologies. As the most recent survey said, a lot of the residents and businesses want Rehoboth to be a leader in that respect. So if we're just doing what the rest of the nation is doing and no better, I'll urge you all to revisit this topic at some point to be able to talk about the sorts of things that can, triple weather stripping on doors and windows and better insulation and those sorts of things to reduce our global warming impact. A project for the future, not for right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I didn't think I'd be commenting on this, but when I was trying to do some research as to the violations and penalties in the stormwater protection amendment that we're going to discuss later, I went to the beginning. It refers to the certain articles for that, the language, and I went to the beginning of the code, and it talks about the International Building Code 2012, which I guess eventually could be 2018 edition, including Appendix Chapter E, F, and J, as published by the International Code Council B, and is hereby adopted as the building code of the City of Rehoboth Beach in the state of Delaware, and each and all regulations, provisions, penalties, conditions, and terms of said building code are hereby referred to, adopted, and made part hereof, as if fully set out herein. So I thought, okay, I'll go and I'll find out what the penalties are for this particular issue. Then I found out that to do that online, to get a PDF, it cost over $100. And for this little bit, I wasn't going to do that, so I actually asked someone, Kevin, is it accessible? So this is confusing, and based on what everybody just said. And secondly, if someone wants to research it and understand what the provisions are, why do they have to pay $100 or more?
Okay. Thank you. Anything else?
Walter Birmingham, sorry, I missed one item. What does work mean? Does that mean if an electrician comes into the house to install an outlet, does he have to come get a building permit? If this is under, starts at line 84, and it just talks about the fees, but before anybody commences any work. So I think the scope of that work, something minor versus some price ought to be in there. You shouldn't have to fear because the aerator on your kitchen sink and some person calls in and the plumber comes in is going to charge $95 for a service call, that they would have to come and get a permit first. I'm not trying to raise issues, but it's better to have that comment available before you vote on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing further. We'll move on to C on old business, which is discussion of a proposed resolution setting a fee schedule for wireless telecommunication facilities. Again, that's in your packet.
And this is a follow-up to your vote on September 9th pertaining to the small cell wireless ordinance. The fee schedule that was recommended, this is Mr. Mandelis's approximation, I'll say, of what he believes that is consistent with the city's fees and sections now that we have to insert here. So we do need a fee schedule. Folks are starting to come in apply for their permits, and this is a follow-up to that September vote and meeting.
Right,
Fees in the ordinance, they were in the ordinance that we approved, correct?
there are some fees in the ordinance. There's some other areas that refer to a fee schedule, but we did put some of the fees. I remember there being a discussion about what is the, there was something that we definitely put a fee in the ordinance for.
I thought there was some
These-
sort of application fee that was $250, and I don't know, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's not here, so. I don't remember what was in the
Call it up and
ordinance.
look back at it.
No, I don't recall the $250.
And the fees are very much restricted by the federal guidelines, so are we in compliance with all the federal
We
guidelines
are
with
in
these fees?
compliance. So Mike Roberts, who did the original ordinance, provided the schedule. I used the schedule that he provided to prepare our ordinance. His comment to me was that they are certainly in compliance with the FCC 2018 declaratory ruling, and that they are at the maximum allowable or toward that end.
They are at the maximum.
Yeah.
level. Okay.
His comment to me, I'll just read it verbatim. He says, the fees below for small WCFs are the maximum permitted under the FCC's September 2018 declaratory ruling. The city may exceed these fees if it wishes, but should conduct a comprehensive cost study detailing the justification. So you can do it if you can justify it under certain instances, but these are the fees that have been declared to be allowable at the maximum amount.
Are there any that we've added that are not covered in the allowable maximum amount under the FCC regulations?
Mike actually said to me, the fees for the non-tower WCF, so these are the non-tower wireless communications facilities, and the tower-based WCF are not subject to FCC ceilings and may be set as the city sees fit. So for the again, the non-tower and the tower-based. So for the small wireless, the declaration dealt with the
Yeah,
small cells.
right.
So anything tower or non-tower based, that ruling didn't.
So are we raising the tower and non-tower from what it was in the past?
I don't think we had,
No.
we didn't have anything in the past, right? Yeah.
So these are new fees.
Yes.
So why are we imposing the new fees?
Why?
Yes.
So before it was,
I mean, if it's never been done in the past, that's my point.
so prior to the ordinance, it was, I won't say it was arbitrary, it was not arbitrary, but it was consistent with the last time business had come in requesting, to put a tower up, to put a small cell site up. So the AT&T, the last folks that came in, you'll recall, with five sites that they recently completed this year. We have an agreement with them for $2,000 for each site on an annual basis. So that's $10,000 on an annual basis for AT&T. That was, again, consistent with what we've done in the past, maybe increasing it just a bit, but this codifies the fee schedule because the regulations now are, it can't be that arbitrary amount. So it can't be negotiated. It has to be, I'll say, set as we're doing now within the ordinance. Does that make any sense?
Are there, and the annual right-of-way fees, that's blank, is there, on the, or is that just a heading for the ones
That's the
below?
heading.
Okay, I
That's
see
the
it,
heading,
okay,
right.
I see, okay.
So which ones are subject to the FCC ceilings that are listed here?
So the non-tower, the first one, $1,000, is subject to it. I'm sorry, is not subject to it. The next one is subject to it, the small WCF. The one below that, small WCF, is the tower-based WCF of 2,500 is not. The non-tower WCF is not, and the small WCF at the bottom is.
Okay, so there's three that are subject to that, and they're all within the,
Correct. Allowables, yep.
and the other ones are new, that we're starting to apply to the tower, or the non-tower and tower, the non-small WCF, I guess I should say.
Right.
How did we come up with these fees? I'm just curious.
Again, we went to the Cohen Law Group, which is the consultant or the law firm who did the main ordinance originally, and this is the schedule that they suggested based upon what they've done
Yeah,
with other places.
with other places, okay.
Anything else? What's our next step on this?
This could go on the agenda at the end of this month for the regular meeting agenda for adoption if the commissioners are ready to do that.
And it would not be a public hearing, it would just
That's
be,
right.
just be a vote of adoption because we've already had the public hearing.
You wondered about that?
Part of
It
270.
is part of 270, but it's not a change to the ordinance. The ordinance already says there's going to be a schedule, and this is just adoption of the schedule. So I think you can do it without a public hearing.
Can you put that on there, Ann, for the 15th?
And can we get an update at some point, not today, obviously, but at some point about the number of applications that are coming in and where they're coming from and all that? And what's being installed?
Yeah, certainly, we can recap that.
I'd also like to see the, as I mentioned before, the plan for the year. Like how many are actually coming in for the year? Where are they going to be? And what type are they going to be?
We've had several meetings with both AT&T and Verizon. They're close, but they haven't yet submitted.
Okay, they're working on that,
Yes,
though, is the bottom line. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to new business, which is a presentation by Dennis Jennings for concerning news racks locations throughout the city. Some of you may recall that this is something that came up, I think Dennis told me, maybe worked with Glenn on back in 2011 and kind of came to the attention of the commissioners at that point in time and then kind of slipped away. And so Dennis has had this in his back pocket for a while, and he's got a lot of things to bring to our attention. And which will lead into the possibility of a creation of an ordinance relating to news racks. And again, Dennis had worked on that back in 2011 with the city solicitor.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here. Did you all receive a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes,
Unfortunately, we don't have it up at the moment. And is this something Max can get for us real quick? I think so, and the reason I wanted to bring this up to you all is I've had a few citizens that come to me with their concerns about the newsstands and the obvious proliferation of them and their basically condition. To them, the concerned citizens, the biggest concern is basically it's a blight to them, some safety issues with them. The city did address this issue back in 2011 and went as far as drafting up an ordinance for basically the control of them. And I'm not sure what the reason why it was dropped at that time, but at least we have that legwork in front of us. I was hoping to have this PowerPoint up for you. There's a lot of good information, and it really presents a strong case of why we should probably try and control these a little bit. If you take a look around town, if I remember, if my memory serves me right, we have approximately 118 of these newsstands around town. I believe it's a total of like 21 different vendors. Doing my research and looking at some emails back in 2011 regarding this issue, at that time, we only had approximately about 41 newsstands around town. So we almost tripled the number in the past 8 years. It's quite a lot.
Dennis?
Yes.
Excuse me a second. Would you like to postpone for a couple minutes and we can go into the next
Yeah,
item?
absolutely,
And
we
then
can
that
do
way
that.
you can have your, I know it's been attached to our agenda and it's
Sure.
probably attached to the agenda that some people have. But it might be helpful to have your actual slides.
Great,
If that's all right, if you don't mind. We're just going to hold that for a second. We're going to move into, B, which is discussion of the draft ordinance pertaining to stormwater protection measures for construction projects.
Thank you, Mayor. This is something that I've worked with Kevin Williams on. As we just heard earlier from Debbie, the Sussex Conservation District only reviews stormwater management issues for projects that disturb 5,000 square feet or more of land. So we've been discussing how to implement some of those measures within the city for projects of a smaller size. So this ordinance would implement certain measures for projects of 2,500 square feet or more. So it would not be a Sussex Conservation review. The city would be implementing it, but what it does is, in both the commercial districts and the residential districts, it adopts some of the standards used by Sussex Conservation districts. So the important part of the ordinance reads as follows. It says stormwater management. Site preparation activity, construction activity, and demolition activity disturbing more than 2,500 square feet of land area shall utilize silt fencing, stabilized construction entrances, and stormwater inlet protection devices for construction site stormwater management consistent with the standards and specifications provided in the current version of the Delaware Erosion and Sediment Control ESC handbook. So that handbook is the book that is used by Sussex Conservation District. It is available online, and you don't have to pay for it, Sally, thankfully. So you can see those, and they provide detailed construction drawings of how these measures are supposed to be implemented. It's something that our staff will be able to point to on construction projects to say somebody's either in compliance or not in compliance. And Kevin believes that implementing these certain devices is going to take care of a big portion of the problems we're having right now with stormwater management. So we talked at one point about doing a much more extensive ordinance that would, get down to the granular level. And Kevin said, no, we need to get something on the books more quickly that deals with 90% of our issues. And this is what he believes will do it.
And this is basically a protection measure for those obviously surrounding any construction sites. So we've had numerous in the past individuals coming to us, and I've gone out there myself along with the Director of Public Works and the building officials. There's construction across the street from my house, and there's little silt fencing. So we're actually extending this to make it improve that for the neighborhoods.
Great, so long overdue. It's wonderful to see this.
Any questions on this?
No, I certainly agree with Susan's comments. It's long overdue.
Yeah, I know they've been talking about it for years.
Sally has.
Please. Sure.
Well, good morning again. I'm Sally Foreman, founder and president of Save Our Lakes Alliance. And for those who may not know, I think most of you do, however, we're a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to protecting, restoring, and maintaining our 3 Rehoboth lakes. We are generously supported by our community, and much of our community is greatly involved in what we do. So that we have a good understanding of why this amendment is necessary, I'd actually like to read from the Delaware Erosion and Sediment Control book that has been referred to, which creates the standards and specifications as to why an ordinance is necessary to protect our lakes, our community from the environmental impacts of sediment. So here goes. Stormwater discharge generated while construction activities are occurring have potential for serious water quality impacts. The biological, chemical, and physical integrity of the waters may become severely compromised. For example, a number of pollutants are preferentially absorbed into mineral or organic particles found in fine sediment. The erosion and delivery of sediment into aquatic ecosystems is the primary pathway for delivering key pollutants such as nutrients, particularly phosphorus, metals, and organic compounds. It has been estimated by the USDA that 80% of phosphorus and 73% of nitrogen in streams is associated with eroded sediment. Even more startling is the apparent ability of sediment to act as a long-term memory or storage media for toxicants. Studies show that pollutants such as DDT, DDE, PCBs, and chlordane, whose use has been banned or highly restricted, can still be found at detectable levels in sediment deposited years ago in the bottom of water bodies. The most recent evidence we have of what toxins may be in our lakes was a test done prior to dredging the west end of Silver Lake that was funded by Solar 3 in partnership with the city. That test showed levels of arsenic. With over 40 storm drains flowing into Silver Lake, we know it's extremely likely that more toxins exist that are not only harmful to the lakes, but also to human health. That's why SOLA recommended in 2009 that the city, quote, adopt an ordinance that would require builders, developers to use best practices to contain runoff to lessen the amount of harmful substances entering the lakes, end quote. And it was included in the 2010 Comprehensive Development Plan. So, after 10 years, I'm glad to say we are finally here to discuss an amendment that addresses this issue. And I do want to comment on the specifics of that, but I also want to introduce a new subject that I think is somewhat immediate. And that relates to the city has now entered a new era of development where you have to deal with many large properties being developed within the city, such as 3 new hotels, large theater, and beach walk over 8 acres. Because they are 5,000 square feet, normally the Delaware stormwater regulations would apply and be managed by the Sussex County Conservation District. But the question arises, are those regulations enough to protect the very special environment of Rehoboth, its lakes, the ocean, and its trees, as well as adjoining properties and the health, safety, and welfare of its community? One recent example of how these regulations failed to do that was the demolition and construction at the Rehoboth Beach Auto Shop. Despite the fact that they adhered to the stormwater protection plan that was submitted to the Conservation District, stormwater continues to flow onto adjoining residential properties. And because of the nature of that business that uses toxic chemicals, one wonders what is in that water. When I brought this to the attention of the program manager of the Conservation District, her response was yes, they were in compliance. But she also said, and I quote, "Please note the county and/or municipalities can be more restrictive than the state." And as a footnote to that, that property adjoins the beach walk property, the proposed beach walk property, where you'll have 2 very large old buildings being demolished and a parking lot that is full of all kinds of chemicals that have accumulated there over the years. Another example where the Conservation District had an approved plan for a property was the Scott property along Silver Lake Drive, where 3 very large homes were built. And I witnessed myself the runoff from inadequate silt fences, but also during construction, the neighbors were greatly bothered by the runoff. After those 3 houses were finished, the runoff continued, and neighbors continued to complain about that coming onto their property. Ultimately, they had to tear up the road and put a pipe under the road that emptied into Silver Lake, into Lake Comanches. So that again was an example of those regulations really not doing what they should have done. So while this proposed amendment is a step, the city really needs a comprehensive stormwater protection ordinance that fully advances the continued health, safety, and welfare of Rehoboth Beach community, as well as its unique environment that extends beyond the 5,000 square feet lots. And one way to do that is to analyze what parts of state regulations are adequate and where they are not. Then adopt your own ordinances that can fully meet these goals. As to the draft that we're reviewing today, I'd like to present a few recommendations that we believe will make it more effective. It would be good to have a definition of what disturbed soil is, and the handbook actually has that, which is very simple. The physical properties of the soil itself are changed, and that's in quotations. That would be, I think, sufficient language. The physical properties of the soil itself are changed. It should also require that granting a permit is conditioned on the approval of a soil erosion and sediment plan that shows the site's existing topography, indicates how it will be altered, identifies the control measures that will be installed, and describes how and when these controls will be implemented and maintained. This should also be required for redevelopment projects that clear, grade, or in any way disturb the Earth's surface. The ordinance limits protection devices to silt fences, stabilized construction entrances, and stormwater inlets. You really need to expand this to include swale, berm, hay bands, and riprap to cover all possible protections depending on the circumstances of the site. And I can tell you why that's necessary. Again, at the Scott property, it was not adequate. And also, the property being developed on Silver Lane, on the shoreline, I personally witnessed a pile of dry sand, dry concrete on the bank of Silver Lake. And once it rained, all of that was being washed right into the lake. Monitoring is also an important part of a contractor to be sure they are in compliance. The question is there adequate staff to do that? I and many others, as Sharon has pointed out, have called her and her predecessor, seeing runoff from construction sites throughout the city. I don't know if you do have the personnel, but there are municipalities have found another way to notify their city officials when a contractor is not in compliance. And that is not a difficult thing to do. And I'm going to show you a copy, and I can leave it here, of what's done in the District of Columbia. It's simply a sign that is posted, and it says, to report erosion runoff or stormwater pollution from this construction site, and there's a spot where you put in the address, contact the Department of, maybe licensing, building and licensing, provides a phone number, provides an email address, and also a mobile app number. I think it would be a way to, you have to have certain identification I guess in your amendment as to size and content and all of that, but this at least is a start, and I think would be very helpful to put the contractors on notice that the public is watching and there's a potential that they would report any violations that they see. Okay. There's another part of the handbook that relates to or addresses the storage of construction material on sites. And basically it says, materials for such construction shall be maintained on the site of construction in such a manner as not to interfere with pedestrians or vehicular traffic, and adequate barriers and lighting are maintained. But in no way addresses the runoff of hazardous waste from construction or demolition sites. And the handbook does provide a section on that, and it says, standard and specifications for construction and demolition site waste management and spill control. The definition, Practices implemented to reduce the potential for stormwater runoff to transport construction and demolition site waste that may contaminate surface or groundwater. In the event of a spill, control the source of the spill, remediate and properly dispose of hazardous substances. The purpose? To prevent the generation of non-point source pollution from construction and demolition sites through effective handling, storage, and disposal of building materials and other construction site waste. To prevent hazardous waste from contaminating surface and groundwater, remediate spills, and dispose of contaminated materials properly. I've gone by many demolition sites and seen these large containers that have all kinds of things that came from the house, and who knows what's in that. It could be lead, it could be pesticides, it could be all kinds of contaminants. So if you're really serious about making this a more effective addition to the code, I recommend that this be adopted. What I mentioned earlier is I could not find the penalties for violating the provisions. Glenn, do you know what those are?
So the ordinance provides that any person, firm, or corporation violating this section shall be subject to the penalties provided in the building code adopted in this article. So now we're using the 2012 building code and the 2012 residential code. The penalties that are provided in that code would be the penalties that would apply to violations here. I don't know what the exact number is.
Well, that's
right
what
now.
I figured too. That's what I tried to access
Yeah,
that.
I
And
can
it's
get
not
that.
available.
Yeah, I can get it. Yeah, you're right. It's frustrating that the codes aren't available. I think the 2012 just became available. There are a couple places you can find it, but the 2018 certainly is not. I mean, the council code, I think gets
You
a
can buy it
revenue source.
online, PDF.
Right.
But it's still over $100.
Right. We do have several copies here, and I'm sure that, if you want to come and ask the building officials to look at one, they have no problem doing that.
Okay, well, that section is especially important, so I look forward to receiving that and commenting on it if necessary. Okay, so to wrap up, since it has taken 10 years to set this amendment in motion, we think it's worth a little extra time to consider and add these and any other meaningful additions. I'm sorry, I lost a page here. Any recommendations that will make its intent complete. We ask for your support in making it a document that truly advances, quote, the health, safety, and welfare of the Rehoboth Beach community and protects its environment. We also ask for your immediate attention to review state stormwater regulations to determine if they provide adequate protections for the large lots that are being developed in Rehoboth, and if not, adopt your own. But this is an immediate issue that cannot wait another 10 years to address. Thank you for your time and attention, and please know we are available to help the city in any way on issues that relate to the lakes.
Are you gonna submit those notes? I was trying to take notes, but
They're messy. So I can do it, but I just can't do it right now.
I'd just like to have an opportunity to talk with Kevin about everything that you raised and see, some feedback from him. So
Okay. Happier it's not in my handwriting, because you'd never read that.
thank you for
Okay. Any
Well,
questions?
Thank you very much for your work and thoughtfulness on all this and sharing this. I like the recommendations. I'd love to see it again in writing, so really take a look, and I would strongly suggest that, like you suggested, that one, we can't wait another 10 years, and time is of the essence, and so we should, I think, in short order, take a look at what you've suggested and recommended and see how that integrates and blends in with this. Are any of the recommendations that you're suggesting part of the County Conservation District when they apply their rules to the 5,000 plus disturbed soil, or are these generally above and beyond that?
Well, what part are you talking? You're talking about
the
just the
handbook-
amendment itself?
No, the things that you're
Oh,
suggesting that we
the
could add to
larger
this.
properties that are being developed. Well, I haven't gone through all of that, and that's why I said it needs an analysis, because in some cases it may be appropriate and effective for what's happening in Rehoboth. In other cases, it may not, and I gave you several cases where the regs weren't really working. So I think that's,
That's for the large projects.
yes, yeah, the kinds of development I talked about, the hotels and Beach Walk, and yeah.
So Glenn, you'll get that information, and then you'll work with Kevin, and you'll let us know if we need to bring this for the November meeting, or we need
Yes.
to postpone until further.
I think still leave it on the agenda, because even if it's suggested changes or additions to it, it'd be an opportunity to talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, and if you can leave that for the next agenda, consideration and possible vote,
Mayor, could I make a comment on this topic also?
please.
Thank you very much. Stan Mills, 34 Maryland Avenue, and also 1 Cookman. As many of you know, I'm getting ready to construct a house and hopefully break ground shortly. I wanted to comment on a few things here, my observations over the years. You know, I walk a lot around town. I see a lot of construction. And one of the things here it mentions is disturbing more than 2,500 square feet of land. You shall follow certain conditions, install silt fencing. I find even today, a lot of silt fencing is not installed properly. It's just sitting above the surface. So it's just merely cosmetic. It does no good. So I'm hoping that this manual and handbook will explain that it has to be buried into the ground a certain number of inches to actually serve its purpose.
Has a really good detail of how it needs to be done. Yeah.
Excellent. And then, of course, it needs to be enforced, and we need to follow it up. So that's one thing. How I've been looking at this whole ordinance essentially is, how do we keep contaminants from getting into the catch basins and storm drains? So that would be one way to keep your dirt on property. The second mentions that you would need to stabilize the construction entrances. And for my understanding of that is that there's actually a certain size of stone that is required, because when rubber tires go over it, that certain size of gravel or stone promotes the dirt coming off the wheels. Now, it's not perfect. There's a lot of challenges with the keeping sites clean. I know it's incredibly different, and it's not going to be perfect, but we can certainly, I think, reduce the amount of dirt that gets into the street and do that. And again, hopefully this ESC handbook gives certain criteria for that. The third is stormwater inlet devices. Again, if that's in the ESC booklet, I'm happy with that. But one thing that I think we need to be cognizant of is there's too much clean out of concrete trucks in the street, and that will instantly clog the storm drain filters. So we need to do a better job of monitoring that and trying to keep an eye on that. Back to the silt fencing. Well, that's a construction challenge too. I hope that we can recognize that sometimes they might need to take it down to get a forklift across there, but put it back up, afterwards. My biggest focus, though, is on what triggers this. And it says where you've disturbed 2,500, more than 2,500 square feet of land is proposed to be disturbed. Now, Sally, you gave a definition of physical properties of the soil are changed. I don't really know what that means. I want to know what does disturbed mean. For instance, I have a very small house that I'm building. And I'm having a full basement in part of it. And my hole that I dig for the basement, including extra area all the way around it to deal with the foundation walls, is less than 2,500 square feet. So I don't need, according to this, to adhere to that. Now, I don't know how they're digging it, and I know that they're removing a lot of soil, but let's just stop using my example. There's another example down Virginia Avenue that's got on a double lot. It actually is probably more than 2,500 square feet just for the dug basement. However, because it's a double lot, they have an enormous, probably 50 or 100 cubic yards of dirt piled around that house. Is that considered disturbed? With the same thing for my lot, if they piled the dirt all the way around it, even though my basement hole excavation is less than 2,500 square feet, therefore it doesn't trigger this, but it's all filled with dirt all the way around it. Isn't that part of the problem, though? And now maybe without that silt fencing, I would contend that it's a problem. I would suggest that probably all new residential houses need to abide by these rules. And maybe it needs to be as small as 1,000 square feet or something to capture almost all of them. I think this is rather anemic, and I would hope that you consider that 2,500 square feet is no magical number for retaining dirt on the property, and that it should probably be a much, much smaller number. Thank you very much.
Thank
You
you.
know, I agree it needs to be defined, but when I talked to Kevin Williams about this, you know, obviously the conservation districts is 5,000. In fact, I asked the head of the conservation district when she was here this summer, how do you define, because they seem to define it as a lot of 5,000. But then I said, no, it says disturbed land, and she didn't really have an answer for how to determine. And I believe in talking to Kevin that the reason he made this 2,500 square feet is he thinks that that covers any construction on our 5,000 square foot lots, because you would be disturbing at least 2,500 square feet in the process somehow or other. That's how he came up with it, to cover it. But I agree, it needs to be defined.
Just a quick comment. So does digging the excavated basement mean disturbing the soil? I would contend yes.
Yes.
Does putting soil on top of other soil, is that disturbing?
Yes, I would say absolutely.
Yes.
I would, but I would say it's absolutely. I would say if you walk on the property, it's disturbing it. If you drive a truck on it, it's disturbing it. So I would think that, you know, any kind of movement of soil or whatever is on the property is disturbing. Anything further?
Thank you.
If not, we'll take it up the next.
I just real quick, I was wondering if the comments made by Sally were in writing, or if you'd be willing to put them in an email. Did you say that already?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry I missed that. Thank you. That would be helpful. I wasn't able to start or to write all that, so thanks.
Thank you. Dennis, we'll go back to you, and I see it's up on the screen. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Evan, for bringing this up. Not quite the PowerPoint, but at least have the PDF version here. So, okay, once again, I've had citizens come to me complaining about the news racks around town. And the concern is basically the safety and the aesthetics of the city. They're a blight, is what they are. So let's go through this and kind of give you some numbers and take a look at going on. So I mentioned earlier, September 2011, when the city initially looked at developing an ordinance, there were 42 racks with 10 vendors. And as you can see right now, and this is as of September of this year, we've got 119 with 23 vendors and 29 different locations within the city. These are all the different vendors that are represented throughout the city. As you can see, some of them, like Delaware Coast Press, we've got 14 news racks alone just for them. Sunny Day Guide has 10. And not part of this presentation, but some of these publications, not only do they have numerous stands, but they've got stacks of their publications throughout numerous restaurants and businesses throughout town also. So they're well represented within the town. As you see, 95 are located on public right-of-way, with 24 on private property. And we'll get into the presentation here. It shows you where they're all located. So you could see that most of them are down there within the first 2 blocks of Rehoboth Avenue, Wilmington, and Baltimore. Private property, you see up here like rural farms. People ask, what denotes private property? The ones you'll see down in these other areas, they're pretty much sitting in a setback to one of the businesses, which we consider private property. And one of the myths or questions that I get quite often is, well, it's on private property. How can you control that? We definitely can through the proper ordinance. There's been precedent set, not necessarily in Delaware, but I know the California Supreme Court has ruled that you can. And in fact, talking with the code compliance director in the city of Big Bear Lake in California, all of their news racks are on private property. They don't allow any of them on public right of way. So I found that pretty interesting. Okay, we'll start with some of the locations. I was only going to add just a few samples, but I thought that with only a few, you really weren't going to get the whole issue here at hand. This really depicts the problems we're having with so many of these uncontrolled stands. And we're just making our way down the avenue. And you see right here, down on 70 Rehoboth Avenue, back in September anyways, these stands were empty, one in front of the other, just sitting there. That's just one of the minor issues that we have with them, and we'll get into the issues here shortly. Of course, down at the end of the avenue, towards the boardwalk, you see just numerous of them. Then again, over here at the post office. And we're in Wilmington, First Street. Moving on over to Baltimore. Okay, issues. So there are a lot of issues with these uncontrolled news racks. None of them are secure to the ground. Some are weighted down with sand, but you'll see in a slide here. So, some of these high winds are blowing them over. It's a safety issue. We're running into unauthorized business advertisement. I ran into one that had a stack of menus from the restaurant nearby. People posting, flyers from their business on them. There's a restaurant that has put their decals on several of these newsstands, advertising their businesses. Trash is a problem. A lot of people, busy summer, trash cans get full. They have no better place to throw their trash, so they throw them right there in the newsstands. Empty and abandoned, obviously that's an issue. I was asked, why can't we just take them? I mean, they're abandoned. Why don't we just get rid of them? Legally, because we don't have an ordinance in effect, we just can't take that newsstand. So damaged, I've seen damaged news racks, broken glass, broken windows. That's a big safety issue. And just, plain old unkempt, they just look terrible. One of the bigger problems too is there's a couple locations where you're actually blocking people from getting out of their vehicle because they're right up next to the curb there. And then, of course, graffiti. A lot of them have graffiti on them. So we take a look at some of these here. You can see the trash piled up on and around the newsstands. Here we got an example of garbage, rotten apple, clearly an abandoned news rack. Here's an example of somebody trying to get out of their vehicle. And then here, of course, all the different decals, unkempt, it's really just does not look good at all. Here we've got the, blocking where citizens might not realize they can actually pay their tickets. This is where they can, drop it off, blocking the view. Here's one with the broken glass, and this one was abandoned as well. Here you got one that's fallen because of the winds. The one right over here next to it's got the graffiti all over it. Another example of unauthorized or illegal business advertisement. And by the way, they're not licensed to operate in town. So now, from here on out, it's just all suggestive in nature. Not saying this is what we need to do, but if we can come to some sort of conclusion to control, the placement of all these stands to reduce the clutter and the blight within the town. An ordinance that we would develop would be something that would balance the important role associated with the sale and distribution of newspapers and periodicals, and also provide for the safety and health and general welfare of our citizens. So some of the ideas in an ordinance, which we do have the draft that was developed back in 2011, which we can start with and work on it from there. But basically, I'm suggesting that we designate certain locations and kind of limit them where they can be. Maybe the size of them. I know some cities have gone with, you know what, you're going to get a stand, or you're going to get a stand, it's going to be this color, it's going to be this size. So they all look the same throughout the city. Something that actually gives us enforcement of these unmaintained and these abandoned stands. Like I mentioned, I just have no legal right to just confiscate them now. Also, something important in the ordinance, a requirement for them obviously be registered, get a license to have them here, and also some sort of indemnity clause, not holding the city responsible for anything. And there are cities who've gone and had them insured. If you want a news rack in town, you have to have it insured. So some suggestions, we can come up with multi-units. The city can provide them. You can see in this example here, you've got your paid for periodicals and then your free periodicals. That's one example. Another example, some of these you can purchase and you can just have them built however you want. This is just a multi-unit, and you can have all kinds of different sizes. This was Bethany Beach, where they said, okay, you know what, you at least have to put them under, the structure that we provided, which is, a little bit better looking. I did talk to Bethany. I believe they took these down because they were blown over in the wind. So I'm not sure why they didn't secure them. So, like I said, this is just suggestions. Place them in just a few locations, maybe 5 locations. I'm looking at, Chamber of Commerce, City Hall, Post Office, and then, down further over here at First and Wilmington, and maybe on the other side on First Street as well. And that's if we want to provide the stands, these multi-units. If we say, okay, you can have a news rack, you provide your own news rack, then it's, where do we want to allow them to have them? I still say we control the where to put them.
What about down at the visitor center?
Visitor center, that's a good idea as well.
I just noticed that they're all kind of clustered in the first couple blocks. So I just wanted to
Right, yeah. And like I said, like the private property, even some of the cities that I've researched who allow them, they don't quite control them on private property, but what they do is ask that the property owner in writing allows them to do it. They supply a copy of that with the city. So these are all just suggestions, and if it's something that we want to move forward with, we can take that 2011 draft ordinance, and Evan Miller and I can come up with a few suggestions. If we want to provide the stands and those multi-units, we can come up with the costs. The pros and cons with us providing them, obviously the cost is a con, and the maintenance. But on the other hand, we've got them all located in just a few locations and all in one unit instead of all these stands. We can ensure that they're not blocking people getting out of their cars. Down there at the end of Rehoboth Avenue, down at the boardwalk there, people get out of their car, but then they have to walk all the way around these newsstands, to get to the sidewalk. So these are, like I said, suggestions, questions.
Dennis, is it fair to say none of these have licenses to do this?
The Cape Gazette has licenses for theirs. They do license theirs, but all the others are not.
Are there any lease agreements with the city to have it on city property?
No. Mm-mm. And like I said, that's what was originally addressed back in 2011, because that was the problem. People are just placing them down, and at that time, the building and code official was trying to remove them, but we just didn't have the legal right or an ordinance in place where we could.
So currently, there is no approval process
Correct.
for an entity to put a stand up and put their product in.
That is correct. And one morning, when I was driving into work, I was behind, I believe it was Coast Press, had a flatbed trailer just chock full of stands. I didn't have time to follow them around, but, I couldn't stop them.
Yeah, and actually, I think a number of the people, Coast Press being one of them, obviously uses some of these stands, but they just drop stacks. I mean, they drop a stack at City Hall.
Right.
Out front, and I think they just drop them around town. So basically what you're saying is we'd need an ordinance to do anything with what's there.
Correct.
And, the other, there's 120, you say, out there now. And it just seems like, especially some of these are dropping them off at other private places. It just seems like we should do an ordinance and put together some kind of a policy of registration, insurance, these suggestions that you've made, and then maybe start small.
Right.
I mean, I know you've put together this picture of maybe 5 sites with 8 each, but that seems like a lot too.
Right. And some of those sites, they have 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think maybe spread them out more, up and down Rehoboth Avenue, kind of, like whether it's the visitor center, which is way down there, or other places. But I just, it does seem to be a safety issue. It's unsightly. And there's just too many. And if you think about what you said, from 40 to 120 in 8 years, it's pretty substantial growth, and that means if we don't do anything, we could have 150 in 2 or 3 years. So I think it's something worth looking at, and maybe figuring out what kind of structure, if we want to do that, because I would think that in order for us to put an ordinance in here and then maybe control this situation, we may have to pay for it, but we could maybe charge and lease the properties or whatever, and that way we could maintain it.
Right.
This seems like a really good time for us to be doing this, because in many ways it could be consistent as we go forward with the new signage.
Yep.
As we're decluttering our city, as we're
Good point.
attempting to standardize signage, this would fit right in. It seems like to more standardize this, to have some rules to get at the kinds of issues that you've so well pointed out, Dennis. This has been very helpful, and I just think the timing would fit in as we go forward with the wayfaring signage.
Yeah. Dennis, did you come across any other municipalities that may have taken an ordinance upon themselves? You said Big Bear Lake or whatever in California. They had done that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And that's why I was surprised with City of Big Bear Lake in California. Like I said, they don't allow them on public right-of-way. Everything is licensed and permitted, but they're on private property.
I mean, that's the way their ordinance
I'd have to
reads.
see and figure out how they do that, because
Yeah.
I tell you,
First Amendment.
it's a very significant speech issue, which is why the courts generally with newspapers, many of these are newspapers, some of them are commercial type speech. So it's commercial and non-commercial being put in these racks, but it's a significant speech issue. And generally, unless you have a ordinance that is well tailored to meet a municipal need, in this case, it's probably the public safety of having passage on the rights of way, and the aesthetics to some extent. The ordinances have been struck down oftentimes if there's not a, you know, a well-tailored construction of the ordinance to address the needs. So I just don't want to leave today with I agree, they are clutter and they are everywhere, but we need to be careful and address it in a thoughtful way so as to not run afoul of those constitutional protections. And that's frankly the reason it got dropped last time around. It was just getting too difficult to ensure that we were complying with all the constitutional requisites.
Is a plan like this one sustainable? I mean,
Well, so the draft ordinance that we did back in 2011, I think is a 7 or 10-page ordinance. I mean, it's not as simple as there's going to be 5 locations.
No, it
and here's
wasn't
where
that
they are.
simple, right.
And, yeah, so I mean, it's a significant issue, and I think,
10 pages.
yeah, so you know, those are basically the locations that we set out in that ordinance in 2011, and there was reasoning and data behind it. So Stan remembers those days, I suspect, but hopefully it'll, you know, I think that we are at a point where they need to be regulated because they are everywhere. I don't want anybody to think it's a very easy task and just pick some locations and set it out and be done with it.
No, could we, I mean, if we were to set up an ordinance, could we start with a number and say, hey, we're offering it, so that takes care of the First Amendment kind of rights?
Well, the way the ordinance is set now, if I recall, the draft ordinance, it does set up a number of locations and a number of racks that are permissible at each of those locations and gives dimensions as to the actual size of the rack. And then there is a lottery system that basically if, I think everybody, I can't recall exactly how it's set up, but it's a lottery system to assign those racks that are provided for under the ordinance.
Right, and that original draft, they had three locations, and then any other areas as designated by the city manager, so.
Solicitor, imposing a fee structure or a license requirement or a lease agreement, does that pose any problem with the First Amendment?
It does, yeah. Probably, I mean, I can't say for certain, but it's probably unconstitutional to say unless you have enough money, you can't say what you want to say. So, yeah,
So we would not be able to charge, basically?
probably not.
Okay. Got a
we-
comment from you?
Could we set the actual taking care of the maintenance of it
That's
to
all,
the people
yes.
that?
Yeah, that is all in the draft ordinance, yeah. Mhm.
Well, I agree. I think we need to move forward with looking at this and coming up with some substance. I think it would be helpful, Dennis, when you and Evan dive into it a little bit deeper, maybe getting some input from some of the stakeholders in this, you know, such as the Chamber of Commerce, Camp Rehoboth, and get some input from them.
Absolutely.
Oh, and the Cape Gazette. Got it.
Cindy wants to say something. She was around back when we were doing this last time, so.
I can't believe, Cindy Lovett, 4 Canal Street. I am so happy you guys are taking this on. Thank you. I was one of the first ones that sent this message out because these things were just multiplying, and I can't believe it's 2011 that I did it. I actually called about 8 cities, and 6 of them called me back, and we talked about the whole thing and how they're doing it. And one of them that has done this successfully is Key West. I actually created call reports that I sent to Stan, and I don't know if anybody else has them. I'd be happy to resend them out. Some of the towns do have a lottery, and I think Key West is one of them. As far as private citizens, there was one store that I went in and said, did you okay this, that this is up against your store? And they said, well, when we took over the space, it was there. So they just kind of inherited the things. So that's another question to ask. Do you still want that there, whoever you are? And yes, they are protected by the First Amendment, which is what creates the problem. As long as they have any article of any sort in it, it's protected, even if it's just one article. So that does create a problem. And there are some that do charge $25, but it's not to be able to put it there. It is the administrative costs that are necessary to now track these things. That's how they kind of got around it. The one thing is to keep in mind, people already think that the city makes money off these boxes. Because when I was saying, oh, well, the city gets money off these. No, they don't. So that's kind of a little piece of misinformation. But there are definitely cities that have done it successfully. They say it's not easy, that there's pushback, but it can be done. So thank you, and I hope this goes forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy.
I'm assuming at the very least, we could get them cleaned up, like the ones that have the decals on them, that's not protected speech, is it, to face the boxes?
No, and that's why in the draft ordinance, there are requirements that the boxes be kept clean of dirt and grease and decals and all that, yeah.
Yeah, and I would think if this is a path we want to take, and depending on how we want to set it up, maybe the city has 3 or 4 different racks that people through a lottery or something have. We'd just go around and put stickers on everything that's around town now saying that this thing is going to take effect as of January 1st, and they'd have to pick up their stuff and take it off. And then we just remove stuff that wasn't.
Dennis, I just want to applaud your initiative here. I just love how you do this when you come forward with new ideas. This is just totally awesome. So, number one. Number two, when you come back to us, would it be possible to maybe think through a few options on funding models for this? So it's, whatever it ends up being that's legal and whatever. So we have some, different ideas to think through based on maybe the research Cindy's done, what other towns have done, and something that helps keep our costs down, but, allows for the free speech. So maybe there's 2 or 3 different ways we can approach this. Maybe there's a standard, and we say to anybody who wants to come in, you have to, put it in this thing that you purchase, or whatever the case may be that you come up with. So
Yeah, Abby
that'd
and I
be
will
really
work on that.
helpful.
We'll come back up.
That'd be helpful.
And introduce some suggestions.
Kind of like you did, but I mean,
Sure, but
maybe
more-
there's some other ones.
Sure, some
that-
others, and in more detail, costs and everything like that.
sounds
Absolutely.
good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Please.
Surprise.
Chris Flood, Cape Gazette. Among the things I do with the paper, I am the circulation manager also. So all those bright, well-maintained green boxes that you see in those pictures, I've physically done that all myself. I would say I reserve too much comment until there's actually an ordinance in front of us to look at and see what is being proposed officially. The Cape Gazette considers itself to be a member of the community, which is why over the last 2 years, we have put out all new boxes. Our boxes are well maintained. The beach paper boxes are put out every spring and then taken back every fall, because we understand that empty boxes don't look very good and aren't well maintained, and so we attempt to do the best we can to, keep Rehoboth Beach looking pretty, I guess. And I would be happy to help. That's how I put it. So thank you very much.
Chris, would you send me the dimensions of the Cape Gazette standard box?
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Dennis. It's very helpful. We'll make sure it doesn't go to the back burner.
Okay, sounds good.
Keep it, and then if you can keep working, and maybe check something like Key West.
Right.
If somebody like that, because it sounds like it's got some of the things that you thought about for your ordinance.
Yeah, I've got a handful of other cities.
Yeah,
codes.
and it would be, interesting to see how many other cities have, and relative to the size of Rehoboth, and, lottery, and whether they charge for maintenance or, what they do. But thank you very much.
All
That's
right,
very
thank you.
helpful. Last on the new business is discuss the recommendations of the audit committee approving the audit as prepared by the auditing firm of Barbicane, Thornton and Company for the city's fiscal year ended March 31, 2019.
Thank you, Mayor. The Finance Director, Mr. Bert Dukes, is here as well. The Audit Committee report, you each have a hard copy, and I believe we sent it to you electronically as well. This is an annual report from our independent auditors that is completed, and the city staff just met with the Audit Committee. They had a posted regular meeting just last week with the 2 members of the 3 members of the Audit Committee. One was absent, and the Audit Committee made their recommendation to approve the audit as prepared by Barbicane Thornton. On a regular basis, we just bring this to you for your approval. if you have any questions, we're happy to entertain them. It'll be on your regular agenda meeting for approval by the commissioners.
And that'll be on the 15th? On
Correct.
the regular. And you can put that on there, please? Any questions at the moment? If not, you can read this over the weekend and send in your report. But we will discuss, obviously, at the 15th meeting. Thank you. Thanks, Bert, for being here. Any citizen comment? If not, we'll move on to any commissioner comments.
Mayor, I'd just like for the next agenda, the November 15th agenda, just like to have a discussion put on there for vision and priorities as the city manager's starting the budget formulation process for 2021
I'll
timeframe.
pass
We've
that
done
on.
that the past couple years, so it's just a good discussion, good guidance opportunity, so that'd be
Yep,
great.
I put that on for the city secretary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Future meeting dates, just a couple things. The 15th, obviously, is our regular meeting. In December, the 9th is our workshop, and the 20th is our regular meeting. If you could, the parking committee wants to come to us and make a presentation about their suggestions as we go into next, the 2020 season. But it sounds like it may be as long as an hour. So I've asked the chair to look at any date of the week of the 2nd that we could have a special meeting that she could come present. She's going to come up with a date. So if you can keep that in mind, and I'll send that out as soon as I hear from the chair about a special meeting. It would just be a presentation of her suggestions for parking. And then just as we go into the budget season, as we've done in the last couple of years, if we can just kind of think about the fact that we're going to be here, a workshop, a regular meeting, January, February, March. Hopefully won't need all those sessions for budget, but to have the budget meetings the same simultaneously on the regular meetings as well as the workshop. So, for example, in January, I think it's the workshop would be the 6th at 9 o'clock, and figure that the budget meeting would be at 1 p.m. that day. And then the 17th in January would be the regular meeting at 3 o'clock, and maybe 10 a.m. for the budget meeting. That way, we have it all together. And again, hopefully, we won't need the whole 6, because I think we've been getting pretty efficient at it, but that would be March, February, and January. And if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Right, exactly. And they were done. And they were done.